I had a real sensory disgust with being overweight. I hated the way that everything rubbed together and I could fit my arms on my rolls of fat around my stomach. I hated the kind of feeling of being fat. I would be really envious of other women. I would look at other women and their naturally slim body shapes and just be angry. I realised that there was something called Overeaters Anonymous. And I thought, oh, wow, that's me. I'm not a slave to food anymore. I don't worry about food. I don't think about food. I see people eating cakes and ice. It just doesn't come into my being anymore. I just eat 3 meals a day.
Hello and welcome to 12 Steps and 12 Questions. My name is Silvio and I'm an addict. This pod is full of personal and inspirational stories of recovery from addiction. And in every episode, I'll ask each guest the same 12 questions about their life, addiction, and recovery. Quick warning, there will be some graphic descriptions and a healthy amount of swearing. For this episode, please welcome Jill. Hi listeners, before we get to our guest today, just a quick reminder. 12 Steps and 12 Questions is not substance or behavior specific, and I welcome all 12 steppers. Our guest Jill got in touch with me to be on this pod, and if you'd like to do the same, to work your 12th step, then reach out to me please on 12steps12questions@gmail.com. The email is also in the show notes. And with that, Jill, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Thank you. My name's Jill. I am a compulsive eater and I live in Southwest London, and I'm approaching the big 50 this year, and I have been abstinent in recovery since March 2022, so about 3 years now. And I say abstinent in the sense that I've not eaten any of what I call my red foods or any sugar, and I haven't sort of done any weird behaviours in the sense of my old behaviours, but it hasn't been perfect. But I do count that as my kind of abstinence since that point, because I've been recovering since that time, and I've not put any of the weight kind of back on that I did lose. So, yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Before we get to the first question, if I get anything wrong, because it is not always not my fellowship, although I've done a few meetings. So if I get any of the terms wrong or, well, just basically stumble and bumble through this, do give me a hand and let me know when I make mistakes or whatever, so that, for the people for the listeners, that they feel like I'm doing it right and that we are getting the terms right. I think this is really important. So I know that we speak of abstinence versus sobriety and all these sort of things, just to be sure that we get it right. So the first of the 12 questions I ask each guest on this pod is, Jill, did you have any adverse childhood experiences?
Yeah, I guess this question kind of is in my mind from listening to your podcast, because it's probably the only question I can remember that comes up. And so I was kind of thinking that all people, I guess, there's a continuum in life, and at some point we all have some trauma and some dysfunction, and so we all kind of come on that line. But I guess I'm pretty low down that line, really. I had, a reasonable childhood. I was loved. I didn't have any kind of trauma or abuse in the sort of big senses of the word, but there were sort of dysfunctions in my family, as I think there are dysfunctions in any family, really. My mother came to my father with 3 young boys when she met my father. So she came to the marriage with 3 boys. So I kind of was born into 3 big brothers who were much older than me, sort of 9, 10 and 11. And my father, I think, from kind of retrospect now, even just in the last 10 years, he's been dead about 12 years now, I think probably was on the spectrum, autistic spectrum. And he found sharing me and my mother very difficult. And so there was a lot of tension and conflict actually in the home, where I was this kind of loved daughter and sister, but I also felt that sense of trying to negotiate a lot and trying to keep the peace, and feeling a little bit like, sorry for my brothers and sometimes angry at my dad. And they both, now both my parents, I think, suffer with alcoholism, and that's more in their later years, really. But there was dysfunction, but essentially, it was, I was a particularly intense child. I was diagnosed with ADHD quite late in life. So I was an undiagnosed ADHD little girl in the 1980s. And that wasn't recognised, and I was typical. I wasn't like what they think ADHD little girls look like now, kind of inattentive and daydreaming. I was full on impulsive, very hyperactive. I think I had quite a lot of rage as a little girl, which I think was probably...
Yeah. I think, there's quite a lot in that. And I love the caveat that you gave about, I don't really have real trauma. I just have this little trauma that I think this is really interesting that we qualify this, in one way or another. We speak of these things and we say, well, simply because, I don't know, someone wasn't shot or something really out of the ordinary, we somehow think that we lessen this. I think this is really interesting to me. There is a whole different podcast in neurodivergence and addiction, obviously, and there's so much good stuff about this out there. I was also an undiagnosed ADHD kid in the 80s. Yes, very, very. And I realize only sort of with hindsight, I suppose, and it sounds like you've made a really similar discovery, how much it ran riot with me and everyone else in our lives, this condition, and laid the groundwork, I think, for a lot of stuff that was to come later on. But I'm particularly interested, nonetheless, in this role that you sort of spoke about of yourself, of the peacekeeper, keeping peace between different warring tribes in the household. How did that manifest? How did that show up?
It's a really good question, because I didn't have any awareness of it. I just very much wanted and needed everyone to love me, really, I think. And so I think it showed up in the home with my dad being very angry and jealous, and my mum also trying to be a peacekeeper and trying to keep everybody happy, therefore probably not having much space for herself. I think in my brothers that they were very angry and still are angry, I think, today. And for me, I think it showed up in trying to find peace and belonging in food, in fantasy, in it's hard to kind of think. It's hard to kind of think back at those times and see myself as the little girl.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah. Was it a loud household or was it a quiet household?
No, it wasn't a loud household. My brothers, by the time I was 5, where I can really properly remember life, 5, 6, 7, they'd kind of, the 2 oldest ones had moved out because they, one went to live with his grandfather because my father was so awful, and the other one was 16. He went off and done his own thing. There was only really my other brother, and he just, he lived in the front room when I was sort of between 5 and 10, and he used to smoke lots of weed in the front room, and my dad used to be full of rage. So I suppose there must have been points where there was noise, but I don't think so. My father was a very quiet man. He was very introverted and quiet and contained, and he worked very hard, and he was very diligent, and he was very, he very much cared financially, and but he was very emotionless. I think I held a lot of the noise.
Okay. Obviously this is way past any kind of competence I have, but it is interesting still that I think we have different roles, obviously, that we play in families and things, and they change over time, and perhaps also with different people at certain times. What I think is interesting, though, is that on the one hand, it seems like your father was this introverted, quiet man that you said on the one hand. On the other hand, there seemed to be a lot of rage there as well. Was he the person that everybody tiptoed around in the household?
No, I don't think so. I mean, my brothers refused to tiptoe, I think. And I didn't need to tiptoe because I was, I just demanded. I've got these very stark memories which instantly came up in some step fours in a kind of a year later when I was doing the steps again. And I had this kind of moment in meditation of remembering being in my bedroom as a little girl, and obviously having been sent to bed probably numerous times, and screaming, "Daddy, Daddy," wanting him to come upstairs, and relentlessly screaming. And he wouldn't. And I don't know what's happened. Perhaps I've been told to go to bed many times, but I had to do quite an extensive step before it because I realised how much I'd made him out to be this, lovely, lovely dad who I did love, obviously, but actually there was parts of him that couldn't emotionally be with me, handle me, love me, and I had to do a bit of a step down on how I kind of made him be this wonderful dad that actually he didn't know what to do. And in that time, and I wrote a letter to him saying, "How could you do that to a little girl? How could you not come up and see her? How could you do that?" So I worked it through, and it was a real emotional, wonderful, grieving journey that let go of a lot of things towards him because I didn't know were there until sort of a few rounds in on the step 4. Yeah.
And that is lovely that a step 4, even though we're sort of preempting things just a little bit here, a step 4 can really take you to those places and do a deep dive almost, and a continuous deep dive into these bits. Yeah. It's I find it really interesting. I mean, this almost opposing sort of neurodivergences. On the one hand, you have someone who's probably on the spectrum and so finds emotions difficult, and struggles with different behaviors, and then here you are and you bring quite a few of those behaviors into that person's life. And I think especially with things going undiagnosed as they used to in the 80s, where you were just weird or wild or a bit stupid, and that was just sort of the labels that were attached. There wasn't that sense of just care that perhaps if we just label people with this, then it's not going to do anyone any favors. It just didn't exist back then. So yeah, this is really interesting. Our question 2 is, what did the moment you first got hooked, quote unquote, the fun times look like? Now, this is a little bit more aimed, I suppose, in the way I phrased it at the time, at people who have a party phase and then, with substances, and then it kind of gets out of hand. But if we adapt this slightly to behaviors, that include, for instance, food, then at some point, something comes into your life, a behavior or a substance. I suppose food is a substance. Comes into your life that does something for you that changes things, changes the way you feel. How did that come into this young girl's life, and when?
I guess the food came in quite, in my early teens, really, when I first started to have money and I had a little job, and because there wasn't much food in my household. My mother wasn't really a foodie. There was never snacks. You never had snacks in those days like people have big snack cupboards now.
Right.
So it was more after school that I would, go and get, massive packs of biscuits and just kind of demask and decompress from being at school all day and coping with wanting to please everybody and wanting to like tame down stuff. And then, so I would just eat massive packs of biscuits, binge on them, and then go home and binge on toast, and then I would have my dinner. But I guess what made me laugh about your question was I had a substance party phase, and I kind of I launched into that by going to university, and then I just went off abroad on a whim when I was 19. And I suppose by the time I got to 18, 19, I'd already started using all sorts of things. And I think kind of weed was my first one. I smoked weed for every day for 5 years, from the ages of sort of 18 to 24. And I took all sorts of substances, really. I went and lived abroad in Spain for many years, and it was very much party, substance, lots of coke, lots of MDMA, acid, everything, and lots of alcohol. And that's what I was thinking about, actually, when I was thinking about this, is that I never got to really know who I was, because when I'd finished the drinking, the taking the drugs, I'd get up in the morning and it would be the food, and then the food would fill me, and then by lunchtime it'd be the alcohol, and then it'd be and it was just, it never stopped. It was a constant consumption. I was addicted to everything. I was addicted to being really brown. I would tan myself to an inch of my life. And I would be out at everything. I wouldn't be able to miss any kind of parties. I would be there. Do you know what I mean? I'd be even I've gone to bed at like 5 in the morning, I'd be up at 8 if there was something going on. So I was just a massive consumer of everything and anything. But food was always there, picking me up. The drugs and the alcohol, I could and eat. I did get addicted to, but I could always stop. I always had enough. But I would always want to pick them up again, but I always had enough. I never got to the point where I'd kind of be, well, obviously I did have points where I collapsed and stuff, but it wasn't regular.
Yeah. So food was always there as the thing you may have fallen back onto, so to speak, as being the main event, and the other things were... There was happening, but there were. It's interesting. I think it's fair to say, a similar relationship between drugs and alcohol, really, in that drugs were always my favorite. I'm not really a big drinker, and so on. But if all else failed, right, I was always able to just have a bottle of wine and just feel content enough with that for the time being, so to speak. But the main event were always uppers, so coke and MDMA and all sorts. So yeah, I think that there is quite a parallel there. So. I'm sure you had yourself a good time when you were out there in Spain, and it must have looked like a party for some time. And then how did it progress, and how did your food behaviors perhaps progress?
Yeah, I mean, I had food behaviours underlying all of that. So when I was out in my 20s, I had periods of bulimia and not anorexia, but I became very thin and tried to stop eating. I was never an anorexic. I desired to be one, but I could never be one because I always wanted the food. So for me, I'm kind of 99% compulsive overeater and 1% restrictor. So yeah, I suppose that the drugs kept me reasonably thin, because it's easier to not eat so much when you're on uppers, as you call them. But I guess by the time I got to 25, I met my now husband, and we came back to England, and I got pregnant very quickly because I'm very impulsive, and I think, it's a good time to have a baby. Why not? And don't think about it, just do it. And I guess I just kind of, I just started eating because there was there wasn't anything else to do. And that's my journey, really, just going up and down the stones. I'm quite tall, so my ideal weight is about 10, 11 stone. And I just used to career up to 16 stone, back down again. There's a wedding, go back down, up, down, all sorts of different diets and fasts and, but it's that devastating feeling that I was really thinking about in some step 1 work I was doing recently, of watching myself go back up the stones and just not being able to do it, just not being able to stop it, not being able to stop eating.
And so this is, if we break this down just a little bit, somewhere you have to go out and you have to buy the food. You're already feeling a bit funny about that, I suppose, or knowing that you're not doing the right thing. And then the consuming of it. And what would it do to you? How did it make you feel in those behaviors? What is the main thing that you got out of it? Comfort or something else? Well, what do you see what I'm trying to get at? I mean, I know, for instance, that every time I used to use, I'd be quite uptight and feeling just a bit about everything, and or upset about something or whatever it is, and just take 2 lines and all of a sudden, I feel like I can breathe easy now, and that sort of thing. Where's the parallel there for you? How did it make you feel? What did it do for you that you couldn't do for yourself?
I think similar to what you're saying, and similar to what I was saying about when I used to come out of school and eat the biscuits. It's something about it just soothes, it decompresses, it makes me feel safe. It kind of just fills this kind of imaginary, anxious hole. It done everything. I celebrated with it. I commiserated with it. And it was my friend. Food was always my friend. It belonged to me. Nobody could take it away. It was mine. I could have it when I wanted. And I was in control of it, as in control in inverted commas. I was in control of the food. Nobody. It wasn't. Yeah.
And of course, it's also not frowned upon in the way that alcohol or drugs are. We can talk about different levels of social acceptance for either, but it is still true that even as a pregnant woman, you can eat, but no one would sort of look at you weird and say you shouldn't be doing this. So there must be something in that as well, I suppose, the fact that you can just go ahead and do it in plain sight almost.
Yeah.
No. Let's talk about, if you don't mind, about bulimia for a moment, which is such a specific behavior, I think, and one that doesn't perhaps get talked about enough. The idea, I suppose, behind it, or the function, or rather, let me ask you about this. What is the function of it, this purging and this cycle of the binging and the purging? How did you experience that? How did you experience that? And what did it do for you?
Yeah, I don't have a huge amount of experience on the purging. I had a period of doing it for quite a short time in my life, for probably a couple of months in my early 20s. And it was when I was deeply unhappy in a not abusive relationship, but in a relationship that, he wasn't very nice emotionally, and I was very young and naive. And so I almost forced myself to be bulimic. And it would only be so that I could eat. It often with bulimia, it's a sense of wanting to get rid of something of yourself, or to kind of to punish yourself in some way. But that for me, it wasn't that. It was just literally so that I could go and have something massive to eat and then get rid of it and not put on any weight. It was very physical. It wasn't emotional. So it was quite fleeting for me. And I've never been like a particular binger as such. I didn't go and get great big quantities of food and eat them in secret, which I know is quite common in OA. I was more of a just eat all the time. See something, eat it. Have a big breakfast, or then have a big snack, then have another big snack, then have a big lunch. It just never stops. It was more like that. I didn't really have time to binge because I was always eating.
Yeah. Well, I suppose I was wondering if there's a sort of parallel there between that and what in CA we would sort of call a binge user and a daily user. Although I suppose, and I've said this quite a few times on here, by the time I sort of came into just before I really wanted to, when at my worst, really, before I wanted to stop and at my worst, the binges were so close to each other that you could argue it was just a daily use up. But, either which way, thank you for shining a light onto those things and enlightening me a little bit more about how different behaviors like that translate into food. Our question 3 is, what were your worst consequences? And finally, your rock bottom. Obviously, this might cover quite a large period of time, but still somehow at some point, consequences come, and then only consequences are left most of the time in addiction. How did that come about?
Worst consequences. I suppose for me, it was always the physical. It was the being really overweight and feeling, I had a real sensory disgust with being overweight. I hated the way that everything rubbed together, and I could, fit my arms on my rolls of fat around my stomach. And I hated the kind of feeling of being fat. So by the time I got to a certain weight, it would really be getting to me. And I would have really kind of low self-confidence. I would be really, just unhappy and really self-conscious, and I would be really envious of other women. I would look at other women and they're just their naturally slim body shapes and just be angry. It'd be like, what's the matter with me? Why do they get to just eat normally? How do they do it? So I'd be kind of it would just be killing me, and the thought of dieting would be just so much, and I would just be in this kind of perpetual state of misery, actually, and
It's a really tough place to be, isn't it? When you get up and you feel terrible within yourself. Now, I've had times when I wasn't using, and I went for quite long periods without using, where I overate, not to the degree that it would really interfere. But I mean, I did always put on a couple of stones, actually, so it was quite pronounced, and then I'd buy a whole lot of really expensive clothes, shrink myself into those clothes, rinse and repeat. So I have some experience, because that is where my illness can go. And I do remember also sometimes, of waking up and just not really wanting to be within my body, not just feeling incredibly uncomfortable about it.
I had something in a meeting recently, which really kind of, I felt really just gave us such a great picture of my life. And that's that the person was talking about, and it was very similar to me, that under my bed there would be a suitcase full of clothes that were too big and a suitcase of clothes that were too small, and they would both, I knew that I was going either way. I would never be in the clothes that I had for very long. I was either getting down to somewhere where it was smaller, but the big clothes would always be waiting. It was heart-wrenching. I think sometimes when we think of drug addiction and alcoholism and things, we always think of, end-stage alcoholism in particular, people, who've lost everything. They've lost their teeth, they've lost their, and they're physically incredibly unwell. And then we perhaps tend to not give enough credence to things like overeating as being perhaps less acute or something like that. And I think it can be incredibly, incredibly miserable being in that space. How did you go from feeling this way about yourself and then going on a few diets and then taking the weight on again? How did that manifest, and did it make you feel that powerlessness? How did that make you feel? I mean, I was always, this is what I realized in recovery, is that I was always on the upward trajectory where I was putting on the weight. So I was in the food and I was enjoying just being able to eat again, or I was always on my way down. And I used to get a huge amount of satisfaction about losing as well. And I used to get a huge amount of satisfaction about getting to my goal weight. I got there and I loved it. I wasn't one of these people that are often I hear about in meetings who felt very uncomfortable about losing the weight. I wasn't one of those. I loved it when I got there. And that's what I think made it ever the more painful when I was watching it go back up, because I knew how physically happy I felt when I was a normal body weight. I just felt right. I felt me. I felt normal. Yeah.
Feeling normal. Yeah. How did it then come to you coming into the rooms of OA? Was there an event, or did you just have enough?
If you're enjoying this podcast and would like other addicts and alcoholics to hear it, then please make the pesky AIs and algorithms work their 12th step. Hit like and subscribe.
For me, like giving up smoking and giving up alcohol, I had to do it a couple of times before I actually kind of, I managed to reasonably get it right. So I did come into OA in 2015. But what I think about now is I came in already on a successful diet. I'd had a bit of a mind shift. I really wanted to be healthy. I've got a history of breast cancer in my family, and I came into a new diet in 2015 wanting to give up sugar. I had this sense sugar is addictive. And so I wanted to give up sugar, and I was doing well. And the reason is because I put down my substance. So I was doing well on this diet, and I just happened to be Googling some stuff, and I realised that there was something called Overeaters Anonymous. And I thought, oh, wow, that's me. And so I also then launched into program at that point. But my recovery, and I lost 6 stone in that recovery, and up to sort of 2017. And but I always at points would go back to having some sugar on a holiday or something. And because it was all right and it worked, and I managed to go back to not having any sugar, I thought, I'm all right. I can do it now. It also coincided with a faith shift. So I was in a particular faith at that point, and I lost that faith. I was very disillusioned with the religion I was in, and I then coupled it with OA at the time. Don't want to be in this anymore, or the religion. Too many books, too much mantra, too much this. I don't need this. I'm a free spirit. I'm off, sort of thing. And then I ate my way back up through COVID and arrived back in the rooms in 2022, top weight again. And I suppose my rock bottom, I know I know that rock bottoms are very varied and everyone's rock bottom is different, but mine was it's more of a symbolic rock bottom, really, I think. I was on the yoga mat and I couldn't push myself up, and I just started crying. And in this yoga mat, in this yoga class, and it just was this stark realization that I'd just done it all over again, even after I'd thought I'd recovered and that I'd got it, and all over again I was back, and I couldn't even lift myself up the yoga mat. So that was my rock bottom, and it was very symbolic for me. And I literally got back into the rooms the next day, got myself a sponsor, just 3 meals a day, no sugar. And that's where I've been ever since.
Right. Amazing. It's very moving when we hear about people's rock bottoms, right? And with some it's really dramatic. I overdosed, hospital, wife screaming, the whole 9 yards, not breathing, all of that. And for other people, it's really just a quiet realization, but I always find it very moving, I have to say, either which way, when that the cracks just become so big that some light has got to come in. It's a really moving moment. Question 4. At your worst, did you ever want to die? Did you consider suicide?
Never. I've never wanted to die. Never. That's not been ever in my story. In fact, I want to live to a very, very old age, and I always have.
Yeah, good. It is an important question for many reasons, because I, having been to a few OA meetings and things, and knowing from people who are in other fellowships, is that the ones that don't necessarily, the behaviors that don't necessarily immediately endanger your life, like a drug addiction does, a heroin addiction does, or something like that. Of course, suicide amongst those people with those addictions, so that are not sort of substance related like that, are really, really high. So of course, because it can take us there, our illness can. So glad it didn't for you in any case. Question 5. What other methods did you try to get sober before finding the rooms?
Everything. Weight Watchers, Atkins, the bloody caveman diet, fasting for 3 days at a time, 5-2, not eating certain foods, only eating one thing of food. Any diet that I saw in a magazine, I would try. Intuitive eating, going on week-long juice diet. I still can't eat celery to this day because of the smell of it from a week of drink celery. And I even entertained in my mind about having like a gastric band and all these things. So I think anything and everything I tried. It's the madness of diets, though. I would be on the Atkins diet, which you can't have any sugar. You can't even have any sugar from carrots. That's how strict it is. And also I'd be on this strict Atkins diet all week, and I wouldn't even be eating carrots. But then at the weekend, I'd gorge on chocolate brownies and then back to not eating carrots on Monday. It's just absolute insanity.
Yes, it is insanity, isn't it? Yeah. It sounds very strict diet. I mean, I know it was very
It
popular back in
works.
the
You lose lots of weight when you
mid-90s.
do it, but and you're checking all your ketones every day to make sure that you're in ketosis. It's just nuts, the stuff that I used to do.
Yeah. Of course, this gets fired up, doesn't it, by a whole industry that is behind this, apps, magazines, this, that, and the other. I mean, you don't have any apps sort of telling you, this kind of cocaine is going to be a lot better than that kind of cocaine or whatever it is. It's really interesting that how much social acceptance really plays into this. Thank you. Our question 6, and you alluded to a little bit there to this issue, is: did you struggle with the word God when you came into the room? So you had a faith that you felt you were letting go of, and so on. So did you struggle with the word God or the concept?
Yes. I suppose I did when I came back in. When I'd left I had a real faith deconstruct, and I was a bit disillusioned. But what I realised was during that kind of 2-year window when I wasn't in program was I've always been a seeker. Even as a little girl, I was a seeker of the unknown, and I was always searching outside myself, and so I started to explore lots of spiritual things in that time. So I kind of come back in with a really not a concept, but having a higher power. I'd had some quite moving spiritual experiences, and so I didn't struggle with the fact that there was something beyond me. I just didn't have a tangible idea of what it was in my mind at that point, but I knew that there was an energy and a life force and something within me as well that was divine. So I guess I did and I didn't. I certainly wasn't atheist. Yeah. I've never really been an atheist apart from a little moment in my teens. But yeah.
Yeah, interesting. I find, those people who have been seekers, who've got a certain understanding of something outside of them that is bigger than themselves, is more than enough, really, to exactly. Certainly start the journey and then just see where it takes you. Yeah, absolutely. And our question 7, how do you experience your higher power today? It's also a good place to share any God moments if you want.
I was listening to a speaker the other day who talked about how he was really grateful that his spiritual experience, his awakening, wasn't a white light one, because he would always have been searching for that for the rest of his life, and nothing would ever come, Yeah. And that I really resonated with that, because I've had some really wonderful spiritual awakenings and experiences. I had an amazing one in a yoga nidra meditation I did last couple of years ago, or last year, where I just kind of met this divine mother who was also myself, and it was just wonderful. And I can always go back to that moment and recreate her inside of me, and that was one of my most beautiful moments. But I also had another one very early on in program where I had this sudden realization that the God that I loved, I adored, and I had this wonderful relationship with during my faith religion years, was still the same, was still God. It hadn't gone anywhere. It was still, just because I'd boxed it into a particular faith box, religion box, it didn't mean that they were accepting of that box, So my higher power has merged into all the things it was, that it could be, that it will be, it's just become this beautiful sense of divinity within myself as well. That sense of that I am a divine being, as are we all.
Lovely. It's a really interesting and incredibly personal journey, isn't it? How we go on to, in my case, to just even contemplate, to actually remove myself from the erroneous thinking that I had to find basically my mum's God, and rejecting that, and just really finding out that, actually that is not what is meant. Getting over myself, getting over that massive hump at the beginning, and then sort of very quietly starting a journey of thinking, okay, how can I find anything that, in my case, anything that is good with a double O before I can find God and so on. It's an intensely personal journey, and one that needs feeding and developing, the further we go. So I think, you illustrated that beautifully. Thank you, Joe. Which parts of the steps were the most difficult for you?
Difficult. I have had.
Or changed it if difficult isn't the right word, challenging or interesting or remarkable.
I think I have found step 12 challenging in the sense of being a sponsor and sponsoring through my journey. Because I'm quite an all or nothing person. I want to say yes to everybody, and I found myself with quite a lot of sponsees, and then I'm really overwhelmed, and I work in a kind of caring profession as well, and I have caring responsibilities in my home with my children and my parents, my mother, not my parents. But, so I think I found balancing being a sponsor and balancing my own sometimes resentment at being a sponsor, at having to, help people again when I've been helping people all week, and where's me? And, so I can get a bit kind of overwhelmed in that regard. And I did have a bit of period where I took some time off from sponsoring. And I just kept getting the message from God, my higher power, because I do a lot of two-way prayer in my mornings, and my God writes to me, and that's such an amazing spiritual experience as well. But I just get God just saying, I'm not going to punish you for not sponsoring people. You do service in other ways. Don't. It will come when you're ready. I will send you people. And so I just started to just relax and just wait. And actually, it's become beautiful now. I've got 2 sponsees out now, and I really have space for them now. I find myself really loving them and wanting to work with them, it just had to come in God's time, not mine. This kind of perfectionist. I must do this, and I must be a good sponsor, and I must do So I think step 12, but I do find it challenging to balance service and being resentful about service, or doing too much, doing too little. So I think step 12 is my most challenging step.
Yeah, you find it difficult. You and me both, I have to say. There's almost always a moment in the pod where something gets to me, gets a bit more under my skin than I would have expected. And this is such a moment where I've massively struggled with balancing things. I'm not sure if it's an addict thing, or if it's an ADHD thing, or if it's just whatever it is, that balancing things, a balanced life is one of the most incredibly difficult things out there. And of course, I want to, I love having sponsees, love sponsoring, but I also have other people who depend on me. And there is, you spoke of sort of care responsibilities. I have those as well, but then I also have a home group, and then, I had the idea for this podcast, and so on and so forth, and balancing things. So it's a shared journey there. Is incredibly difficult, but it's a beautiful thing when done right. Sponsoring is one of the best things I've ever done in my life. So yeah, thank you for sharing that. Question 9: which character defects give you most trouble? Balancing things for stuff.
But I think my main thing is superiority and judgment. Those are the things that I suppose they come from I get triggered by being unimportant and unseen and feeling left out. Those are my triggers. But then I start to move into like superiority and judgment and criticism to kind of, I guess, protect myself from these feeling unimportant. So I'm always, step 10 is a massive part of my life. I have a step 10 partner, and we do a voice note share every day of our resentments and our gratitudes. And it's always about me wanting and thinking people should act in the way that I think they should act. So it's always a kind of sense of superiority or judgment or criticism or expectation. expect people to be who I want them to be. Yeah, those are my main kind of defects. Heavy area.
It sounds like a really strong practice. Yeah, sounds like a really strong practice, though. When I hear that, at daily step 10, a lot of two-way prayer. This sounds like a very serious recovery practice. I like to commend you, because it can be difficult sometimes, especially if we already struggle with balance. To make time for this, and this is something I say to myself quite often, or I have other people say to me, is that we need to make time for this, or else we will not stay here, or we'll not be growing. And if we're not growing, then we're going back, and, we all know what that means. So that's a really strong message there. Thank you. Our question 10, one of my favorites. What is the best thing recovery has given you?
Peace. My recovery's just given me peace. A deep-seated peace in my heart and my soul and my bones. I feel comfortable in my own skin, not just because I'm a normal weight, but because I also, I really try to sometimes think, even if I put on weight again, if for some reason I relapsed, I would still be a lot more accepting of myself. Recovery's just given me authenticity. It's given me permission to be who I want to be, to turn up as myself. To not make excuses for any weird or loud or impulsive behavior. What other people think of me is none of my business. I don't people please anymore, and I used to do that a lot. So I just feel set free. It's almost like when I was a little girl, I just wanted to be wild and free, and that was I wasn't able to be that because, the restraints of parents and schools, but now I'm an adult and I can, and if you don't like it, then fuck off, so it's just really like, I can be my own person, and it's like a gathering of self. I can gather up all parts of myself from my life when I was a little girl, when I was a teenager, when I was in my 20s, and gather them together and, just kind of give them all compassion and give them all the space, and bring them to my 50-year-old self who wants to take care of all of them and just bring them home.
Yeah. That's a lovely message. Can I also ask while we're here, how do you experience your freedom in your recovery with regards to food? How do you experience, we know the step 10 promises are really strong in the book. How do you experience that with regards to food and your illness?
Yeah, food, it's just freedom from that food. It's like I just eat 3 meals a day. I don't have to think about food. I generally eat the same things, or I eat the same breakfast every day. I eat the same types of lunches and dinners. I don't have to think about it. I'm not a slave to food anymore. I don't worry about food. I don't think about food. I don't, I look, if I see people eating cakes and ice, it just doesn't come into my being anymore. I know that like smoking, if I was to eat it or smoke it, I would just be back smoking 15 fags a day. And I don't want to smoke 15 fags. I don't want to eat cakes. I don't want to be fat. So it just becomes neutral. Food neutrality is a wonderful place to be, but it takes a while because my body has been abused by food for such a long time. It took a good year before I got food neutrality. It took a good year for the whole system and all my hormones and my physical self to just get back to this baseline. I just lived from lunch to dinner to breakfast for a year, and it was, but now I don't. I do enjoy food, obviously, and I still sometimes get pulled into thinking about what I could have,
I was going to ask. What about, I don't know, if you're going in a, maybe a social situation, people go, we booked this table in this really wonderful, wonderful restaurant, and whatever your flavor might be, quite literally. or the occasion might be? And can you still go to a restaurant, for instance, and enjoy a particular type of dish or something like that without it being, of course, within the red food list? But how does that make you feel? And can you enjoy those things here and there, or is it something that you've rather
No, I
not do?
can and I do. Yeah, I mean, I do love to eat out because I don't have to cook or wash up, and yes, I do still gain a huge amount. I mean, I do love food, so I do love to eat out, and and I try and make the best choice, but often I won't make the best choice because I might think, oh, I can have this. I might get very excited like a kid in a sweet shop. And if I've been on holiday, for example, I might have been doing that more often. There's comfort and safety in coming home and getting back to like just the nourishing, simple food, because I can feel myself, floating back into whoa, food's exciting again.
Yeah.
So yes, the answer is I can and I do. But I have to be a little bit vigilant.
Yeah. It's of course the big distinction between alcoholism, or addiction to alcohol or cocaine or any other substance like that, drugs and alcohol, where we have to, and thankfully we have to have a 100%. It's a black and white thing. It's got to be 100% off total abstinence, and you obviously can't be totally abstinent from food. So obviously that the major difference in these things is something to highlight. It's obvious, but still it will express itself in many ways, doesn't it? So, question 11: what would you say to a newcomer or someone wondering if they're an addict?
I think I heard it recently. It's very simple from the big book. It's if you want to stop something and you can't, or once you start something you can't stop, you're probably an addict. Just keep it simple.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. And our question 12. What do you want your higher power to say to you, quote unquote, at the pearly gates?
Oh, such a great question. I don't know about say. I just think I will just kind of melt into my higher power, melt into the arms, into the lap, into the just coming back to just that wonderful feeling I had one day in that yoga nidra meditation, where I just felt completely at one. And I think when people have these near-death experiences and they sense a real sense of peace, I just think it's going to be that. I don't think words come into it at that point.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It is funny though that there's a level, there's different levels there, isn't there? I mean, there's the idea that one might want to hear something like, "Oh, well done," or "Didn't you struggle a bit too much out there?" But welcome home, or something like that. But that was what we do expect and hope for is what you were just saying. That sense of homecoming. Definitely. So this is really profound. Thank you so much, Jill. It's been an absolute joy talking to you. I know it's taken us a little while to get together and make this work, but it was so worth the wait. Thank you so much for being so generous, and you share and so courageous, and for your lovely message of recovery today on 12 Steps and 12
Thanks for having me.
We've come to the end of this episode. Thank you for listening. If you've enjoyed it and would like other addicts and alcoholics to hear it, then please make the pesky AIs and algorithms work their 12th step. Hit like and subscribe. While this pod is based on the 12-Step Recovery Program, it's not officially affiliated with any 12-Step Fellowship. 12 Steps and 12 Questions is not substance or behavior specific, it's fully self-supporting and not-for-profit. And this next bit? It's not allied with any sect, denomination, politics, organization or institution. It does not wish to engage in any controversy, and it neither endorses nor opposes any causes.